The big house stood on a quiet road, far from the noise of the city. It was a place where power lived behind tall gates, clean walls. Many people worked there, but only a few were ever noticed. The rest moved like shadows, doing their work without being seen. Among them was a maid who arrived before sunrise every day. She cleaned the floors, wiped the tables, and washed the windows. Her hands were rough from years of work, but her movements were gentle. She spoke little, not because she had nothing to say, but because no one listened. The billionaire who owned the house was known across the world. People talked about his success, his money, and his strong will. He had built his life through hard choices and long nights, but inside his body something was slowly breaking. He often sat alone, staring at nothing while his food went cold. Doctors came and went with serious faces and long words. Spoke of stress, age, and exhaustion. They gave pills and advice, but nothing seemed to help. The maid noticed changes others ignored. She saw how his hand shook when he lifted a glass. She saw how his steps slowed as he walked through the halls. Sometimes she found untouched meals and full cups of water. She saw pain in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. These signs felt familiar to her, though she did not yet understand why. Her life before this job had been very different. She grew up in a small place where people relied on each other. When someone fell sick, neighbors watched closely. They learned to read the body without machines or big words. She remembered an elder from her past who had shown the same signs back then. Doctors were far away, and help came from knowledge passed by. Voiced those memories stayed quiet inside her mind. In the mansion she moved quietly from room to room. Mother workers walked past her without greetings. Some spoke over her as if she was not there. She was used to this treatment and did not complain. She believed that work done with care still had value, even if no one said thank you. One afternoon she overheard a conversation. Two doctors stood near the study, speaking in low voices. They said the condition was unclear and growing worse. They talked about more tests and stronger medicine. Their words were heavy with doubt, though they hid it well. The maid stood nearby, holding a cloth and listening. Her heart beat faster as pieces came together in her mind. She wanted to speak, but fear held her back. Who would believe a maid over trained doctors? She imagined the look she would get, the quiet dismissal, the raised brow. So she stayed silent and returned to her work, but the worry did not leave her that night. The billionaire did not sleep. He paced slowly through the halls, holding his chest. The maid saw him from a distance. While Clinian's breathing was uneven and his face looked pale, she felt a strong pull in her chest, urging her to act still. She kept her place and watched from afar. In her small room later, she could not rest. Memories returned with clear detail. Sick elder, the warning signs, the simple care that saved him. She realized the danger was not being seen, not by money, not by machines, not by pride, but by watching closely and listening to the body. Morning came, and the house filled with noise again. Phones rang, doors opened, and orders were given. The maid returned to her routine, but her focus had changed. Every sound, every step from the billionaire drew her attention. She felt that time was running out by evening. His condition worsened. He sat slumped in a chair, barely speaking. The air in the room felt heavy and tense. Doctors were called once more. They worked with calm faces but growing concerned. The maid stood near the door, holding a tray. Her heart raced as she watched them struggle. She knew something was wrong in a way that words could not explain, and for the first time she wondered if staying silent was a mistake. The house that never noticed her now stood on the edge of change, and no one yet knew that the answer was already in the room. The evening was quiet except for the soft hum of machines in the mansion. The billionaire sat slouched in the grand chair, struggling to breathe. Doctors moved quickly around him, taking notes and giving instructions. Their faces were serious and their voices loathed. Tried medicine after medicine, but nothing seemed to work. He groaned softly, and the house felt heavy with worry. Maid watched from the corner of the room. Her heart pounded and her mind raced. She had seen this before in her past, the signs, the small changes, the slow weakening of the body. Something inside her told her that the doctors were missing the real problem. She wanted to speak, but fear held her back. Who would listen to a maid over years of training and experience? Still, she could not stand by and do nothing. She moved closer, quietly arranging the trays and adjusting pillows. She noticed the faint twitch of his fingers and the irregular rise of his chest. Every small detail told her more than the medical books the billionaire tried to speak, but no words came out. His eyes looked around the room as if searching for something or someone. The doctors exchanged worried glances and whispered to each other. Hours passed, and the house grew quieter as the sun set. The family stayed in another room, nervously pacing and waiting. The maid cleaned what she could without disturbing the doctors. Her mind went back to her village and the elder who had once fallen sick. She remembered how simple observations had saved him when doctors could not help. She recalled the timing, the gentle touch, and the way small details changed everything. She wondered if she could do the same. Here the doctors began discussing stronger interventions. They spoke of machines and risks and complications. The words sounded foreign to her, but she listened carefully. She realized the billionaire was not responding to their usual methods. Her instinct screamed that the answer was not in more medicine. It was in noticing what no one else could see. The maid moved closer and gently touched his hand to check his pulse. She felt the irregular beat and the tension in his body. She leaned in quietly, noticing the way his eyes darted and the shallow rise of his chest. Every detail brought a new understanding. She began to whisper softly in her mind the steps she had learned long ago. Timing, breathing, small adjustments, gentle support. She felt fear creeping in. What if she was wrong? What if her memory from the village did not apply here? But she could not shake the feeling that something important was being missed. Doctors seemed confident, yet powerless. The house that usually hummed with activity now felt like a waiting room for a tragedy. Suddenly, he coughed and his face twisted in pain. The doctors rushed to give medicine, but she noticed a pattern, a small shift in position, a slight change in breathing. She remembered exactly what to do. Her hands moved almost automatically, adjusting a pillow, guiding his arm, and supporting his back. The billionaire gasped softly, and there was a pause in the machines. The room seemed to hold its breath. The family peeked nervously around the door, seeing the frantic movements. Doctors froze, uncertain if they should intervene. The maid worked quietly, focused on the smallest changes. Minutes passed, and slowly the billionaire's breathing became more even. The twitching stopped, and the pale color in his face began to return. The doctors looked astonished, trying to understand what had changed. The maid continued her gentle care, checking every small sign. She adjusted the blanket, repositioned the chair, and encouraged him with soft words. He managed to open his eyes, and for the first time in hours tried to sit upright. The doctors checked his vitals, and their notes confirmed the unexpected improvement. They whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of it. The family entered cautiously, amazed at the sudden turn. The billionaire looked around, still weak, but conscious. His eyes fell on the maid, who had been quietly standing at the side. Recognition passed slowly through him, though he did not speak. The maid felt relief, but also knew the danger was not completely over. She kept her attention on every movement, every breath. The room that had been filled with tension now carried a quiet hope. That night the mansion felt different. The doctors stayed longer to observe and discuss. The family sat in quiet reflection, realizing how close they had been to losing him. The maid returned to her duties, not seeking praise. She knew that what mattered most was that she had acted when no one else saw the signs. The lesson of watching and understanding the small details had saved a life. The billionaire finally rested in a proper bed with the blanket adjusted, and the room calm. The maid stayed nearby, keeping a careful watch. She remembered the village and the elder who had once fallen sick, knew that experience mattered as much as books and machines. Night passed slowly with quiet steps and soft breathing. The house that had seemed so indifferent now held a fragile peace. The next morning sunlight spilled through the large windows, casting soft light on the marble floors. The mansion felt quiet but tense. The billionaire was still weak and pale. The doctors checked his vitals and spoke in hushed tones. They were puzzled by the slow but steady improvement. The maid moved carefully around the room, cleaning, arranging, and observing. Steps she took was measured and gentle. She noticed things that others ignored, the way he blinked, the slight movements of his hands, the rise and fall of his chest. She remembered her village and the elders who had relied on her observation. She thought about the simple actions that had helped before she understood that knowledge sometimes came from watching and not from machines. Her mind went through every detail she had noticed the day before, every what? Twitch, every sigh, every pause in breathing. She knew that the recovery depended on careful attention. The doctors continued their rounds, giving medicine and adjusting machines. Spoke about tests and procedures and possible complications. The family watched, worried, and hopeful. Billionaire tried to speak, but his voice was weak and horsey. Looked around the room uncertain and scared. The maid stayed nearby, ready to act. Her heart beat fast as she prepared for any change suddenly. The billionaire's breathing became shallow again. The doctors rushed to intervene, but she noticed the pattern she had seen before. She stepped forward, gently adjusting his arm and supporting his back. She whispered softly, guiding his movement without expecting anyone to understand. The room seemed to pause as everyone watched. The machines hummed in the air, felt heavy with anticipation. Minutes passed slowly, and the billionaire's breathing began to even out again. His face lost some of the pallor, and his eyes focused on something far away. The doctors checked him again and exchanged glances. They could not explain why the simple adjustments of the maid were having such effect. The family looked at her with curiosity and awe. Maid remained calm and focused. She knew the danger was not over, and she had to stay alert through the day. She continued to watch every motion and sound. She adjusted the blanket, moved the chair, and kept the environment calm. She remembered the techniques she had learned long ago. Timing, careful observation, and slow support. She applied them quietly, without seeking recognition. The billionaire responded slowly, improving with every small intervention. The doctors tried their methods alongside hers, but the results were clear then. Small details she noticed made the difference. The billionaire opened his eyes more and tried to sit up. He looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. He noticed the maid standing quietly in the corner. Recognition passed through his eyes, though he could not yet speak. The family watched, amazed at the unexpected progress. That evening, the mansion felt a strange mix of relief and tension. Doctors continued their observations, and the family stayed close. The billionaire was resting, but still weak. The maid moved quietly, checking his comfort and adjusting small things. She remembered the village lessons where every small act mattered. She understood that patience and attention were more powerful than machines or medicine. Alone, a nurse tried to suggest a new medication, but the maid observed that the timing was not right. She gently advised against it in her quiet way. Nurse hesitated, but allowed her approach. Within minutes, the billionaire showed signs of improvement again. The doctors looked puzzled, but could not argue with the results the maid had become. The silent guide of the room. Night came slowly, and the house was calm. The machines hummed softly, and the lights were dimmed off. Billionaire slept more peacefully for the first time. The maid stayed nearby, listening and watching every small movement. Every breath mattered. She knew that her actions had saved a life. She remembered the elders from her past and smiled quietly inside. The family finally understood that the maid was not just a worker. She had eyes and knowledge that no one else had considered. The mansion that ignored her presence now relied on her attention. Billionaire would soon recognize that sometimes the answers come from the most unexpected places. The maid continued her watch, silently confident that she was exactly where she needed to be. Morning came slowly in the mansion, with soft light filtering through the tall windows. The billionaire slept lightly, his breathing steady but weak. The maid moved quietly through the halls, preparing breakfast and checking every small detail. She noticed how he turned in his sleep, the tension in his hands and the rise of his chest. Every motion told her more than words could. The doctors arrived early, reviewing charts and discussing treatment plans. They were cautious now, unsure of what had caused the improvement. The family gathered outside the room, quietly speaking in low voices. They watched the maid move calmly around the space. Her hands adjusted pillows, her eyes observed every twitch. The house that had overlooked her presence now relied on her attention. As the day passed, the billionaire woke slowly. His eyes searched the room, uncertain and scared. Maid approached carefully, offering gentle guidance and quiet reassurance. She helped him sit up and drink water, adjusting his posture. Every movement was slow and deliberate. Doctors watched closely but did not interfere. They had learned that the smallest adjustment she made had the greatest effect. She recalled the lessons from her past, where the elders had relied on observation. She understood that patience and careful attention were more powerful than medicine alone. She whispered softly, reminding him to breathe slowly, to shift gently. The billionaire responded gradually, feeling the care in her presence. He could sense someone truly watched him, someone who saw what others missed. Family entered slowly, amazed at the improvement. They saw him sip water and smile faintly. They looked at the maid with a mixture of wonder and respect. She continued her careful watch, making sure he was comfortable and stable. She remembered that even though the crisis seemed to ease, the danger was not gone. Every detail mattered, from the tilt of his head to the slightest change in color. Doctors discussed options for further treatment, but deferred to the maid's careful observation. They realized that her intuition and attention to detail had saved time and prevented harm. The billionaire began to sit upright, slowly supported by the maid. His breathing became more even. His eyes focused more clearly. The family spoke quietly, thanking her silently inside for her careful work. As evening approached, the billionaire attempted to walk with support. Maid guided him gently, step by step. She observed his balance, his hesitation, his fear. She encouraged softly, showing patience and care. The doctors were astonished by the progress. They had never witnessed such recovery, guided by simple attention and careful observation. The mansion felt alive with a different energy. The rooms that had once been filled with routine noise now held a quiet understanding. The family realized that the maid was not just a worker, but a guardian of life. Her knowledge and care had turned despair into hope. The billionaire began to recognize that sometimes help comes from places least expected. That night, the house was calm and peaceful. The billionaire rested in a proper bed with the blanket adjusted just right. The maid remained nearby, observing every slight movement and breath. She remembered her village and the elders who had once needed her core. She knew that life could be fragile and that attention could make the difference. Doctors left reassured that he was stable, but amazed at the unexpected guidance from a simple observer. Though family finally approached the maid with quiet respect. They saw her not as a servant, but as someone whose knowledge and care had saved a life. Billionaire looked at her with eyes full of recognition and gratitude. He had survived the worst moment of his life, and the person who had helped him was someone they had overlooked. The mansion that had ignored her presence now held a new understanding of value and respect. The maid continued her quiet work, knowing that she had done what was needed. Her careful watch had restored life and hope. She understood that sometimes the smallest actions with care and attention could change everything. The house slept in a calm and fragile peace, knowing that the unseen had become the hero of the day. The morning sun came slowly, casting light on the mansion that had seen worry and care. The billionaire sat up slowly, his body still weak but stronger than before. The maid moved quietly around the room, checking every detail, adjusting pillows and blanket sheet. Noticed the rise and fall of his chest, the small movements of his hands, the way his eyes followed the room. Every detail told her what needed to be done. The family entered the room cautiously, their faces full of relief and curiosity. They looked at the billionaire and then at the maid who had been quietly caring for him. They spoke softly among themselves, realizing that her actions had made the difference. The doctors arrived and checked him again. They were amazed at the recovery that had come. From careful observation and simple attention, they exchanged glances, understanding that their machines and medicine had not been the only answer. The billionaire tried to speak, but his voice was weak. Looked around the room, and finally his eyes rested on the maid. Recognition passed slowly through his gaze. He remembered the fear, the pain, and the helplessness he had felt. He also remembered the gentle hands, the quiet presence, and the careful attention that had helped him. He motioned for the family to step aside and gestured for the maid to come closer. She approached quietly, not knowing what to expect. He reached out his hand weakly, and she supported him gently. Lee tried to speak again, and finally managed to whisper words of gratitude. The voice was low, but the meaning clear. The family listened in awe as the billionaire spoke about how she had saved his life. They realized that their assumptions had been wrong. They had overlooked her because of her position and quiet nature. They had assumed that knowledge and skill came only from books and titles. Now they understood that wisdom can come from experience, observation, and care. Doctors continued to check him, but they now asked for the maid's input. They respected her observations and followed her guidance on small adjustments and timing. The billionaire improved steadily throughout the day. He was able to sit up, walk slowly, and take nourishment with her support. Every step was measured and careful, guided by her patient attention. By evening, he could speak more clearly. He talked about how he had never realized the importance of being truly observed and cared for. He spoke about how small details and gentle care had saved him. The family listened quietly, understanding the lesson. In humility and respect, they looked at the maid with admiration and gratitude. The house that had ignored her presence now acknowledged her importance. She had not sought recognition or reward. Her actions had been guided by care and knowledge born from experience. The billionaire promised to ensure she would have opportunities and respect. Going forward, he spoke of education and support and giving her a voice in ways that mattered. The night came, and the mansion was calmed. Billionaire rested in a proper bed, comfortable and safe. The family gathered around, reflecting on the events of the past days. Doctors left knowing that a lesson had been learned about humility, observation, and the power of simple care. The maid returned to her duties. Quietly satisfied that she had done what was needed, she moved through the halls, adjusting small things, checking on the billionaire's comfort, and ensuring everything was in place. Every step was careful, every touch thoughtful. She knew that attention and care had the power to change outcomes. She understood that life could be fragile, and that simple acts of observation and support could save it. The days that followed, the billionaire recovered more fully. He walked without support, ate properly, and smiled more freely. He recognized the maid not as a servant, but as a person whose knowledge and care had changed his destiny. He made sure the family and staff understood her value, her experience and attention were respected and celebrated. The house that once ignored her now looked to her as a guide. The lessons of patience, observation, and gentle care spread quietly among the staff. The billionaire often watched her work, not taking it for granted. He spoke to her often, asking for advice and guidance. He realized that sometimes the most important people are those we overlooked. The maid continued her duties with humility and grace. She did not seek reward or praise, but found satisfaction in the well-being of the billionaire. She knew that her careful watch and gentle actions had made a difference. She remembered the elders from her past who had relied on her core. She understood that life and attention were connected, and that even the smallest acts mattered. The story of the recovery spread quietly among the household. Everyone realized that respect and attention are more valuable than titles and wealth. The billionaire often reflected on how he had underestimated the quiet presence in the house. He now knew that care, observation, and experience could change lives. The maid remained quietly central to the household, always watching, listening, and helping them. Mansion slept in calm and gentle peace, knowing that a life had been saved. The billionaire was healthy and grateful, the family humbled and respectful, the doctors wiser, and the maid quietly content. She had acted when others could not, and her attention and care had saved a life. Her presence would never again be overlooked, and her story would quietly remind everyone that wisdom and help can come from unexpected places. The days after the recovery were filled with quiet reflection in the mansion. Billionaire moved with more strength and clarity than before. He walked through the halls, observing the staff and noticing details he had never seen. The family realized how fragile life could be and how easily it could be lost. Maid continued her work quietly, but with a new awareness from those around her. She noticed small changes in his routine that others missed. The way he paused before picking up a glass, the slight hesitation in his steps. She adjusted pillows, blankets, and seating to make him comfortable. Every motion was gentle and deliberate. She had become a central part of the recovery process, and the household now looked to her insight. The doctors continued to visit, but they watched her carefully. They learned from her observation and attention to detail. They began to respect the experience she brought. They saw that care and patience often had more impact than medicine alone. The billionaire listened to her advice on rest, nutrition, and timing. Had felt safer knowing someone truly understood his needs. Family began to appreciate her beyond her duties. They offered small gestures of thanks, but she remained humble. She did not seek reward. but found satisfaction in seeing him stronger each day. The house that had once ignored her now recognized her wisdom and presence. They began to see that sometimes the quietest voice carries the most important message. The billionaire started speaking to her often. He asked about small details in his health and routine. He asked for advice on posture, movement, and timing. Her responses were measured and calm. He realized that her guidance had prevented more serious problems than anyone had imagined. He learned to value observation and care over status or title. The days passed slowly but steadily. The billionaire regained more confidence in walking and daily activity. The family watched with relief and gratitude. The doctors nodded in acknowledgement of the maid's contribution. She remained in the background, moving quietly, but her presence was now felt everywhere. She remembered her village and the elders she had once helped. She thought about how small acts of observation and care could save lives. Her heart felt calm, knowing that her attention had changed the course of the billionaire's health. She understood that life is fragile and requires patience, observation, and gentle intervention. Billionaire began to trust her completely, allowed her to guide his movements and comfort him without hesitation. He noticed the subtle ways she adjusted his surroundings. He realized that her knowledge came from experience and careful observation. Admired her humility and skill. The family learned to listen to her advice and began applying it in small ways. They noticed how she watched each detail and acted. Without drawing attention to herself, they began to see her as a teacher as well as a caregiver. The mansion was filled with quiet respect and awareness. The air that had been tense with worry was now calm with understanding. The doctors began consulting with her on timing and small adjustments. They realized that their expertise alone was not enough. They learned that careful observation and attention to small details often made the biggest difference. The billionaire felt supported and safe. He could now rest and move without fear, knowing she was there. Evening came and the mansion grew quiet. The billionaire rested comfortably with blankets, adjusted pillows in place, and the room calmed. The maid moved silently, ensuring that everything was perfect. Her hands smoothed sheets, her eyes observed every small movement. She remembered the elders and the lessons from her past. She knew that even the smallest acts could have great impact. The family gathered around quietly, reflecting on the journey so far. They spoke softly about respect, humility, and care. They realized that the maid had changed their perspective on value and attention. They understood that sometimes the most important person is the one overlooked. The billionaire smiled faintly, realizing how lucky he was to have her presence. Night fell, and the mansion slept with calm and peace. The billionaire was healthy and resting comfortably. Doctors were amazed and respectful. The family humbled and grateful. The maid quietly content, knowing that her careful watch had made a difference. She continued her work with patience and attention. Every small gesture mattered. In the days that followed, the billionaire regained full strength. He walked freely, spoke clearly, and ate properly. He made sure the family and staff recognized the maid's value. Her experience and careful observation were respected. She had become essential to the household. The lessons of patience, care, and observation were quietly passed on. Mansion that once ignored her presence now looked to her as a guide. Her careful watch had saved a life and changed the household forever. The billionaire often reflected on how he had underestimated her. He now understood that wisdom and help often come from unexpected places. Maid remained quietly at her post, observing, listening, and acting. Her presence had become central to the household and would never again be overlooked. The mansion was quiet in the early morning light. The billionaire was awake and moving more confidently than before. The maid moved through the halls, adjusting details, cleaning, and observing. Every small action mattered. She noticed the rise of his chest, the tension in his hands, and the slight shifts as he moved. Had become an essential part of the household without anyone saying a word. The family gathered quietly, watching his recovery. They spoke softly to each other about humility, respect, and the value of observation. The doctors checked his vitals and continued to marvel at how well he had improved. They consulted with the maid on small adjustments, and timing. Her guidance had become an essential part of the plan. The billionaire asked to see her alone for a moment. She approached quietly, not sure what he would say. Looked at her with eyes full of recognition and gratitude. He spoke softly about how her care and attention had saved him. He asked about her past, her knowledge, and her experiences. She answered calmly, explaining how she had learned to observe and act with patience. He listened carefully, realizing that wisdom often comes from unexpected places. He began to reflect on how he had overlooked her for so long. He understood now that titles and status did not always indicate knowledge or ability. He realized that she had watched and acted when no one else had. Her actions had prevented more serious harm and had guided him back to health. The family and staff watched from a distance. They saw the interaction and began to understand the depth of her contribution. They assumed she was just a maid, someone to perform tasks without thought. Now they saw that her observation, care, and patience had been crucial. They spoke softly among themselves about humility and the lessons they had learned. The billionaire began asking her about daily routines and small adjustments. He wanted to understand how to maintain his health. She explained gently about posture, movement, and timing. She guided him through simple exercises and changes that improved comfort and strength. Every action was deliberate and careful. The doctors continued their visits but deferred to her on small matters. They had learned to trust her observations and experience. They understood that patient observation often led to results that medicine alone could not achieve them. Billionaire felt supported, knowing she was there guiding him with care. The family also took note and began applying the lessons themselves throughout the day. The billionaire gained more confidence here. Walked steadily, ate properly, and rested well. He spoke often with the maid, asking questions and listening to guidance. Her quiet presence had become central to the household, and everyone recognized her importance. The mansion that once overlooked her now depended on her insight. Staff began observing small details themselves, learning from her patience and care. The family became more attentive, understanding that every action mattered. Billionaire reflected on his past assumptions, realizing that true value is often hidden in quiet places. Night fell and the mansion grew calm. The billionaire rested comfortably with blankets adjusted, pillows in place, and the room organized. The maid moved silently through the room, checking on details, making sure everything was perfect. She remembered her past experiences and the elders she had cared for. She understood that careful observation and gentle actions could change lives. The family gathered to speak softly about respect and gratitude. Understood that the maid had not only saved a life but also changed their perspective. Billionaire expressed his thanks in his own way, promising that her value would always be recognized. The staff nodded quietly, appreciating the lessons of patience, care, and observation. The days that followed were filled with steady improvement. The billionaire walked freely, spoke clearly, and ate well. He made sure that the household respected the maid and valued her knowledge. Her presence had become central to every aspect of life in the mansion. She continued to watch, listen, and guide quietly, ensuring comfort and safety. The mansion that had once overlooked her now looked to her as a teacher and guide. Her patient observation and care had saved a life and changed the household forever. The billionaire often reflected on how he had underestimated her wisdom. He realized that help often comes from unexpected places and that careful observation can be as powerful as medicine. The maid continued her work with humility and dedication. Every small act of care mattered. She understood the value of patience and attention. The family and staff learned from her example, realizing that respect and observation are essential to life. The billionaire was healthy and grateful, understanding that her quiet guidance had changed his destiny. The mansion slept in calm peace. The billionaire rested safely. The family humbled and respectful. The staff wiser, and the maid quietly content. She had acted when others could not, and her careful watch had saved a life. Her presence would never again be overlooked, and her story quietly reminded everyone that wisdom and help can come from places least expected. The mansion was calm in the morning light, with sunlight spilling across the floors. Billionaire was fully awake, walking steadily and speaking clearly. The maid moved through the rooms, attending to small details, observing every motion. She adjusted pillows, blankets and seating, making sure everything was comfortable and organized. Every small action mattered. She watched the rise of his chest, the tension in his hands, the slight shifts as he moved. The family entered quietly, reflecting on the journey so far. They watched his strength and clarity improve. Day by day, they spoke softly about respect, patience, and the lessons they had learned. The doctors checked his vitals and consulted with the maid on small adjustments. They had come to trust her observations and experience them. Billionaire asked her about daily routines and the best ways to maintain his health. She guided him through slow exercises and small adjustments. She explained the importance of posture, timing, and gentle movements. Her knowledge came from experience and observation rather than books and titles. He listened carefully, understanding the value of her guidance. The family and staff watched and learned. They began to notice small changes themselves, applying lessons about careful observation and patience. They realized that the quietest voice could carry the most important message. The mansion that had once overlooked her now depended on her insight and guidance throughout. The day she moved quietly, guiding and observing. The billionaire followed her instructions. Walking slowly and eating carefully, every step was deliberate and focused on improvement. The family took note of her patient actions, learning humility and respect. The doctors continued to monitor, but deferred to her on small adjustments. The billionaire reflected on his past assumptions. He realized that he had underestimated the importance of observation and care. He understood now that titles and status did not always indicate knowledge or ability. He was grateful for the quiet presence that had guided him back to health. The maid continued her careful work, adjusting details and observing small changes. She remembered her past experiences caring for elders and applying lessons learned. She knew that patience, observation, and gentle intervention could save lives. She moved through the house quietly, ensuring comfort and safety. Evening came, and the mansion grew calm. The billionaire rested comfortably. With blankets adjusted, pillows in place, and the room organized, the family gathered quietly, reflecting on the lessons of respect and attention. Understood that the maid had not only saved a life, but also changed their perspective. They spoke softly about humility, observation, and the value of care. Doctors left for the day amazed and respectful. They understood that careful observation and small actions often had more impact than medicine alone. The billionaire rested peacefully, knowing he was guided by someone who truly understood his needs. The family acknowledged the maid's wisdom and patience. The days passed with steady improvement. The billionaire walked freely, ate properly, and spoke clearly. He ensured the household recognized the maid's value and respected her knowledge. Her presence became central to the life of the mansion. She continued to observe, listen, and act, ensuring comfort and safety. The mansion that had once ignored her now looked to her as a guide. Her patient observation and gentle actions had saved a life and changed the household forever. The billionaire reflected on how he had underestimated her wisdom. He realized that help often comes from unexpected places. Careful observation can be as powerful as any medicine. Maid continued her work with humility and dedication. Every small act of attention mattered. She understood the importance of patience and observation. The family and staff learned from her example, realizing that respect and careful watching are essential. Billionaire was healthy, grateful, and aware that her quiet guidance had changed his destiny. Mansion slept in calm and gentle peace. The billionaire rested safely, the family humbled and respectful, the staff wiser, and the maid quietly content. She had acted when others could not, and her careful watch had saved a life her presence would never again be overlooked, and her story reminded everyone that wisdom and help can come from places least expected. The following days were filled with stability. The billionaire continued to gain strength and confidence. He walked and moved freely and began to pay attention to details of his own life. The maid guided him subtly, helping him adjust routines and behaviors. Every action was deliberate, gentle, and focused on continued improvement. The family and staff began to participate more actively. They learned to observe carefully and act with patience. They respected her guidance and applied it in small ways throughout the house. The billionaire smiled, quietly realizing how much his life had changed. The mansion now operated with a new awareness. The quiet presence of the maid was acknowledged and respected. Every small action mattered. Her guidance shaped the daily life of the household. The lessons of patience, observation, and care were carried forward by everyone. Evening fell and the mansion was peaceful. The billionaire rested, fully supported and comfortable. Maid moved silently, checking every detail, ensuring nothing was overlooked. Her quiet watch had become central to the safety and well-being of everyone. The family and staff gathered briefly, sharing reflections and gratitude. They stood the value of humility, observation, and care. The billionaire acknowledged her impact on his life. They spoke softly about the lessons learned from someone they had once overlooked. The mansion slept in calm peace, knowing that life had been preserved. The billionaire was healthy and aware, the family humbled and respectful, the staff wiser, and the maid quietly satisfied. She had watched, acted, and guided when no one else could, and her presence would never be ignored. Again, the story of her care quietly reminded everyone that wisdom and help can come from the most annex.